The parking lot lights hummed above my car as I adjusted the blanket around my shoulders, trying to ignore the cold that had settled into my bones. 3 weeks. 21 days of sleeping in a 10-year-old Honda Civic that smelled like the vanilla air freshener I'd stopped being able to afford. I pressed my face against the window, watching the Walmart entrance where the overnight stalkers shuffled in for their shift, and wondered how I'd become so invisible that no one even noticed the same car parked here night after night. My name is Alina Marsh. At least it was Marsh. I'm still not sure what to call myself now. At 38 years old, I never imagined I'd be one of those women, the kind you see on the news or read about in heartbreaking articles, sleeping in their vehicles because life took everything away. But here I was, clutching a gym membership card like it was a lifeline because it meant I could shower in the mornings, brush my teeth, and maintain enough dignity to show up for my part-time shifts at Morrison's Books without completely falling apart. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were when I allowed myself to buy a real meal instead of the dollar menu items I'd been rationing throughout the week. I'd just finished my shift at the bookstore, my manager Patricia having given me concerned looks all afternoon that I pretended not to notice, when I walked to my car and found the certified mail slip tucked under my windshield wiper. My stomach dropped. Certified mail meant legal trouble, and I'd had enough legal trouble to last several lifetimes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because understanding how I ended up sleeping in a Walmart parking lot requires understanding who I used to be, and more importantly, who David Marsh convinced me I should be. 15 years ago, I met David at a charity fundraiser in downtown Charlotte. I was 23, fresh out of college with an English degree and dreams of maybe teaching, maybe writing, maybe finding some career that would make use of my love for books and stories. David was 28, ambitious, charismatic, already making waves in commercial real estate development. He had this way of looking at you like you were the only person in the room, and when he turned that attention on me, I melted like ice cream in July. We married within a year. I remember my mother pulling me aside at the engagement party, her fingers cool against my wrist. "Elena, sweetheart, what about your plans? You were going to apply for that graduate program." I'd laughed it off, so certain that supporting David's dreams would be the same as achieving my own. After all, wasn't that what partnership meant? Wasn't that what love looked like? The first few years were good. I worked at Morrison's Books part-time, just enough to feel like I was contributing, while David's development company started landing bigger contracts. We bought a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Myers Park, the kind of place I'd driven past as a teenager and imagined belonged to people who had everything figured out. I decorated it carefully, learning to host the dinner parties that David said were essential for networking. I became fluent in wine pairings and conversation starters, in remembering which client's daughter was applying to Duke, and which investor had just returned from Tuscany. "You're so good at this," David would say, kissing my forehead after guests left. "You make me look good, Alina. You make everything work." I took that as love. I was young enough, naive enough, to mistake being useful for being valued. By our 10th anniversary, I'd stopped mentioning my own dreams entirely. When had that happened? I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when I'd stopped talking about maybe finishing that novel I'd started, or taking education courses, or doing anything that existed outside the orbit of David's expanding success. His company had grown from a 3-person operation to a firm with 20 employees. He was managing million-dollar developments, getting written up in business journals, becoming the kind of man who wore expensive watches and spoke casually about market trends. And I worked 20 hours a week at Morrison's, shelving books and recommending titles to customers who actually listened to what I had to say. I managed our home, coordinated with the cleaning service, planned elaborate meals that David often missed due to late meetings. I accompanied him to industry events where his colleagues' wives wore designer dresses while I rotated the same 3 cocktail outfits, letting out the seams when I gained weight, taking them in when stress ate my appetite. I told myself I was happy. I told myself that marriage was about compromise, that David's success was our success, that the house and the comfortable life were enough. I ignored the small moments that should have warned me, the way he'd started looking at his phone more than at me during dinner, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the subtle distance that had opened between us, like a crack in foundation that you don't notice until the whole structure starts to shift. The affair started sometime around our 14th anniversary. I found out about it around month 6, when David stopped bothering to hide the texts from Simone, a 28-year-old project coordinator at his firm. Confronting him was like running into a wall I hadn't known existed. "Alina, you have to understand, things change," he said, not even having the decency to look guilty. We were in our kitchen, the one I'd spent weeks choosing the perfect backsplash for, and he stood there by the marble island like we were discussing a failed investment rather than a failed marriage. "You're a wonderful person, but we've grown apart. You have to see that." Grown apart? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, high and thin. "David, I've built my entire life around you, around us. And that's part of the problem." He said it so matter-of-factly, like he'd rehearsed this speech. Maybe he had. "You made me your whole world, and that's not healthy. I need someone who has her own ambitions, her own drive." Simone understands the business, in ways you never could. The business? Everything always came back to the business. He filed for divorce 2 weeks later. His lawyer was a shark in a $1,000 suit who smiled at me across the conference table like I was an amusing inconvenience. My lawyer, a tired-looking woman I'd found through a legal aid service because I couldn't afford anyone better, did her best, but we both knew I was outmatched. The house had been purchased primarily with David's income. Yes, I'd contributed from my bookstore salary, but it was pennies compared to his 6-figure earnings. Yes, I'd sacrificed potential career advancement to support his rise, but try proving the monetary value of emotional labor and domestic management in a legal system that deals in documented income and asset division. I got $90,000 from the settlement. It sounds like a lot until you realize it's essentially $6,000 for every year I devoted to building a life that was never really mine. David kept the house, the vacation timeshare, the good car. I kept my aging Honda and the knowledge that I'd been traded in for a newer model, like furniture that had gone out of style. Finding an apartment on my bookstore salary, I made barely $1,500 a month, proved impossible in Charlotte's inflated rental market. Studios started at $1,200 a month, and that was before utilities, before food, before the basics of survival. I stayed with my friend Rebecca for a week, but her spare room was really her home office, and I could feel myself becoming an imposition. I tried another friend, Michelle, who I'd known since the early years of my marriage, but she said David had called her, explaining that I was going through something and not myself, and could she maybe give me some space. The betrayal of that, David managing my friendships even after destroying our marriage, sent me to my car. I told myself it would be temporary, just until I figured things out. Just until I saved enough for first and last month's rent somewhere. Just until the universe stopped punishing me for crimes I couldn't even name. The first night in the Walmart parking lot, I cried until my throat ached. The second night, I was too exhausted to cry. By the end of the first week, I'd developed a routine that felt almost normal in its horrifying familiarity. Wake at 5:30. Drive to the 24-hour gym, where I maintained a $30 monthly membership. Shower, brush teeth, change into clean clothes from the carefully organized bags in my trunk. Head to the McDonald's down the street for $1 coffee and bathroom access. Arrive at Morrison's by 9 for my shift. Work until 2. Spend the afternoon at the library using free Wi-Fi to search for affordable housing that never materialized. Grab dinner, usually something from the grocery store clearance rack. Return to the Walmart parking lot by 9 p.m. Read until my phone battery died. Sleep in 40-minute increments, constantly aware of my vulnerability. Patricia, my manager at Morrison's, knew something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her. The shame was too heavy, too consuming. How do you explain to someone that you've become a statistic? That despite doing everything right, getting married, supporting your spouse, being kind and patient and loving, you still ended up here. I'd lost weight. I could see it in my face when I caught my reflection in car windows, the way my cheekbones had become more pronounced, my eyes shadowed with exhaustion that no amount of concealer could hide. My clothes hung looser. I'd stopped bothering with makeup beyond the bare minimum needed to look professional at work. What was the point? David, I'd heard through the whisper network of mutual acquaintances, was doing great. He and Simone had moved into the house. My house, the one I'd painted and decorated and filled with 15 years of care. They'd renovated the master bathroom, ripped out the garden I'd cultivated, turned my reading nook into a home gym. He was thriving, exactly as he'd always done, stepping on whoever he needed to step on to keep climbing. And me, I was learning that invisibility is a special kind of hell. When you're homeless, even temporarily, people look through you rather than at you. The other Walmart parking lot regulars, there were 3 of us in cars, plus 2 RVs that seemed to rotate locations. We nodded at each other but never spoke. Acknowledging our shared circumstance would make it too real. So when I found that certified mail slip on my windshield, my first thought was, what else can they possibly take from me? I picked it up the next morning from the post office, a nondescript government building where the clerk barely glanced at me as she processed my ID. The envelope was heavy, expensive paper from a law firm in Boston I'd never heard of. Whitmore, Sanderson and Associates. I sat in my car in the post office parking lot and opened it with shaking hands, certain it was some final piece of legal paperwork from the divorce, some last humiliation David's lawyer wanted to inflict. The letter inside was typed on letterhead so pristine it seemed to glow. Dear Ms. Alina Marsh, we regret to inform you of the passing of Ms. Marguerite Elizabeth Bellamy, who died peacefully at her home in Martha's Vineyard on November 3rd. As the executor of Ms. Bellamy's estate, we are writing to inform you that you have been named the sole beneficiary of her will. I stopped reading. Marguerite Bellamy. The name floated in my memory like something from a dream. My great-aunt. My grandmother's sister. I'd met her twice, maybe 3 times when I was very young. I remembered a tall woman with silver hair, impeccably dressed, who'd attended my grandmother's funeral when I was 7 and then appeared once more at a family reunion when I was 12. She'd lived somewhere up north, estranged from most of the family for reasons no one discussed. My mother had called her difficult and particular, which in Southern family parlance meant she'd refused to be controlled. The letter continued. The estate has been valued at approximately $6.2 million, comprising investment portfolios, real estate holdings in Martha's Vineyard, and various trust accounts. Ms. Bellamy left explicit instructions that the inheritance be delivered to you personally, with the following note. And there, in different handwriting, elegant, old-fashioned cursive, were words that made my hands shake so badly I had to set the paper on my steering wheel to read them. Alina, you won't remember me well, but I remember you. At your grandmother's funeral, you were the only child who noticed I was crying. You brought me a tissue and held my hand during the service. You were 7 years old. At the reunion when you were 12, I watched you help your younger cousins, making sure everyone felt included, never seeking attention for yourself. You had a kindness that seemed innate, not performed. I've followed your life from a distance through relatives who didn't know I was asking. I watched you marry, watched you sacrifice your dreams for someone else's ambitions, watched you endure with grace what many would have met with bitterness. I waited to reveal myself because I wanted my wealth to go to someone who understood what it meant to have nothing. Use this gift not for revenge, but for becoming who you were always meant to be. You have a strength you haven't discovered yet. Now you'll have the resources to find it. I read it 3 times, 4, 5, the words didn't change. $6.2 million. The number was so absurd, so disconnected from my current reality of counting quarters for gas money, that I started laughing. Hysterical, gasping laughter that turned into sobs, sitting in a post office parking lot on a random Thursday morning, holding a letter that changed everything. The practical details took weeks to process. Whitmore, Sanderson and Associates guided me through every step with patience that suggested they dealt with shocked beneficiaries regularly. There were documents to sign, accounts to transfer, property to assess. The Martha's Vineyard house was a 4-bedroom cottage overlooking the ocean, worth $2.8 million on its own. The investment portfolios were diversified and professionally managed, generating roughly $200,000 annually in passive income. There was a trust fund specifically designated for philanthropic endeavors that Marsh deems worthy. Mr. Whitmore himself, a distinguished man in his 60s, flew down to Charlotte to meet with me personally. We sat in a conference room at a downtown hotel. I'd checked into a room there the day after receiving the letter, my first night in an actual bed in nearly a month, and he explained everything with gentle thoroughness. Your great-aunt was quite specific about her wishes, he said, sliding papers across the mahogany table. She wanted you to have complete control over the estate, with no restrictions beyond the philanthropic trust. She also left this. He handed me a small leather journal, worn at the edges. Inside were entries in that same elegant cursive, dating back years. Marguerite had indeed followed my life, somehow getting information through extended family members who probably never realized they were reporting to her. There were notes about my wedding. She looked happy, but there was something tentative in her smile, like she was trying to convince herself, and observations about David. Too much ambition and not enough character, if my instincts are correct. There were entries from my marriage years, noting the few times I'd appeared in photos at charity events or business functions, always slightly behind David, always smiling that same tentative smile. The final entry was dated 3 weeks before she died. Alina's husband has left her. The family gossip suggests he's taken everything, and she's struggling terribly. I find myself wishing I'd revealed myself sooner, but perhaps this timing is perfect. She needs to discover what she's made of without anyone's help first. Then the money will empower rather than enable. I closed the journal and looked at Mr. Whitmore through tears I didn't bother hiding. I don't understand why she never contacted me. She explained it to me once, he said kindly. She said that in her experience, unexpected wealth revealed people's true character only when it came at their lowest point. If you'd known about her, you might have made different choices in your marriage, stayed for the wrong reasons, or left for the wrong reasons. She wanted you to navigate your life authentically, then receive this as recognition of who you'd become, not as a rescue that would define you. That made a strange kind of sense. Marguerite had been testing me, in a way, but also protecting me. The money wouldn't mean the same thing to someone who'd never known struggle. It wouldn't carry the same weight, the same possibility. I stayed in that hotel for a week, trying to process what this meant. The first thing I did was buy new clothes that actually fit, experiencing the surreal pleasure of walking into a department store and choosing items without checking price tags. The second thing I did was get my hair cut and colored by a professional for the first time in 3 years. The third thing I did was sit in the hotel restaurant and order a meal that cost more than I'd spent on food in the previous month, and I savored every bite. But I didn't rush into anything reckless. I was looking at apartments downtown, having decided to rent for a while before making any property purchases, when my phone rang with his number. I'd deleted his contact information weeks ago, but I still recognized the digits. My finger hovered over the decline button, then curiosity won. Hello. Alina, his voice was warm, familiar, exactly the same as it had been during our marriage. I've been trying to reach you. Your friend Rebecca said you'd moved. What do you want, David? I kept my voice neutral, standing in the empty 2-bedroom apartment while the real estate agent waited discreetly in the hallway. I wanted to see how you're doing. I heard about your inheritance. That's amazing, Alina. Really, I'm happy for you. The lie was so transparent it was almost funny. Thank you. A pause. Look, I know things ended badly between us. I've had a lot of time to think about that. About us, I made mistakes, Alina, serious mistakes. Simone and I were not. It's not working out the way I thought it would. I watched the sunlight stream through the apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? He laughed, trying to sound self-deprecating but landing somewhere closer to desperate. God, Alina, I've been such an idiot. Walking away from you was the biggest mistake of my life. You were always the one who made everything work, who made me better. I see that now. There it was, the truth beneath the apology. I'd made him look good, made his life function smoothly, and now that I came with 7 figures attached, suddenly my value had increased. David, we're divorced. Technically, yes, but it's only been finalized for 6 weeks. People reconcile all the time. We had 15 good years, Alina. That has to count for something. And now, without the financial stress, we could really build something. We could be partners in the truest sense. Partners, the word tasted like ash. Partners in what? Your business, your ambitions, your life. Our lives. Come on, you know we were good together. We could travel, invest in properties together. Maybe you could finally write that book you used to talk about. I'd support you now. Things would be different. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 months ago, sleeping in her car, convinced she was worthless because her husband had decided she was. I thought about Marguerite, watching from a distance, waiting to see what I'd do with my life when everything was stripped away. I thought about my great-aunt's final words: use this gift not for revenge, but for becoming who you were always meant to be. No, I said simply. No, he sounded genuinely shocked. Elena, be reasonable. We could. I am being reasonable. Reasonable enough to recognize that you don't love me, David. You probably never did. You loved what I did for you, how I made you look, how I smoothed your path. And now you see a bank account instead of a person, just like you always did. The only difference is the number attached. That's not fair. I'm trying to apologize here. You're trying to negotiate a merger. There's a difference. I felt calm, clearer than I'd felt in years. I hope things work out for you, I really do, but they won't work out with me. We're done, David. We've been done for a long time. I was just too afraid to admit it. I hung up before he could respond. The real estate agent poked her head back in. Everything okay? Everything's perfect, I said and meant it. I'll take this apartment. Over the next month, I began rebuilding my life with intention. I met with financial advisors that Mr. Whitmore recommended, people who understood that I didn't want to just preserve wealth but use it meaningfully. I established the framework for a foundation supporting women leaving difficult marriages, providing emergency housing funds, legal assistance, job training, all the things I desperately needed and hadn't had. And then I went back to Morrison's books. Patricia looked up from the register when I walked in, her face brightening. Elena, we've missed you. Are you okay? We heard rumors that something good happened. Something very good happened, I agreed. Is Mr. Morrison in? I'd like to speak with him about the business. Morrison's books had been struggling for years. E-commerce had devastated foot traffic, and old Mr. Morrison, who'd owned the shop for 30 years, was talking about closing. He was 72, tired, ready to retire but sad about ending a legacy. I bought the store for $400,000, which was more than its struggling balance sheet warranted but less than the property was worth. Mr. Morrison cried when I told him my plans, to transform it into a community literary center, with the bookstore at its heart, but expanded to include writing workshops, reading groups, author events, and a cafe that would actually draw people in. You're sure? He kept asking. Elena, this is a lot of money for a business that barely breaks even. I'm not doing it for profit, I explained. I'm doing it because this place saved me. When everything else in my life was falling apart, I had this. Books, stories, quiet corners where I could disappear. Other people need that too. We renovated carefully, maintaining the original character while modernizing the space. I hired Patricia as general manager, tripling her salary and giving her creative control over programming. We brought in local authors for readings, started a literacy program for underprivileged kids, created a blind date with a book program that became surprisingly popular. The cafe served fair trade coffee and pastries from a women-owned bakery. The transformation took 6 months. During that time, word spread through Charlotte about the bookstore's resurrection and the mysterious benefactor behind it. Some people figured out it was me. Most didn't care about the details, they just cared that this. He approached during a lull in conversation, Simone trailing reluctantly behind. Elena, you look wonderful. I did look wonderful. I'd gained back the weight I'd lost. My skin glowed from actually sleeping in a real bed and eating regular meals. My dress was simple but elegant. More importantly, I felt wonderful, confident, purposeful, alive in ways I hadn't been in 15 years. Thank you, David. How are you? Good, good. Business is solid. I heard about what you did with Morrison's. That's really something. I'm proud of it. You should be. He shifted his weight, clearly wanting to say more. Simone excused herself to the ladies' room, and he leaned in slightly. Listen, I know I don't have any right to ask this, but I wondered if you might have lunch with me sometime. Just to talk. About what? About, he gestured vaguely. Everything, life, the past. I don't know, Alina, I just feel like we didn't end things the right way. We ended things exactly the way they needed to end, I said gently. You wanted someone different. You got someone different. I hope you're happy. Are you happy? I considered the question seriously. Was I happy? I thought about my new apartment with its view of the city skyline, the bookstore that was becoming everything I'd dreamed, the foundation that had already helped 17 women escape circumstances similar to mine. I thought about my new friendships, built on genuine connection rather than social obligation. I thought about the therapy I'd started, working through 15 years of sublimated dreams and learned smallness. I'm becoming happy, I said. I'm learning how to be myself again, or maybe for the first time. I'm glad, he said, and surprisingly, he sounded sincere. I really am. I know I hurt you terribly, Alina. I know I took advantage of your kindness and your love. I wish I could take it back. If you could take it back, I'd still be the person I was, someone who made herself small to fit into someone else's life. I don't want to be that person anymore. He nodded slowly. You've changed. I've grown, there's a difference. Simone returned, and David made awkward introductions. Up close, I could see the strain between them, the way they stood just slightly too far apart, the way she kept checking her phone. I felt a flicker of pity, not for David's situation, but for the fact that he still didn't understand what mattered. He was still measuring worth in terms of acquisitions, property, money, women who made him look successful. As the evening wound down and I prepared to leave, Patricia texted me, "Big news. That publisher who came to the reading last week wants to do a whole series of events with us. Also, the literacy program got written up in the Observer. We're making a difference, boss." I smiled at my phone, then at the gala around me, beautiful people in expensive clothes, some genuinely doing good work, others just performing charity for social credit. I'd been on both sides now. I'd been the woman in the car, invisible and desperate. I'd been the wealthy beneficiary, suddenly visible again. What I was learning was that visibility didn't determine value. I'd always had value. I'd just forgotten how to see it. 6 months later, the foundation had helped 43 women. The bookstore was turning a modest profit and becoming a cultural hub for the neighborhood. I'd started writing again, not the novel I'd once imagined, but essays about resilience, about the hidden faces of homelessness, about the ways women are taught to make themselves small. One of them got picked up by a national magazine, and the response was overwhelming. Hundreds of women wrote to me, sharing their own stories of loss and rebuilding, of marriages that had consumed them, of finding themselves again in unexpected ways. I took the Martha's Vineyard house for the first time in July, spending 2 weeks in the place Marguerite had loved. Her presence was everywhere, in the careful arrangement of bookshelves, in the garden she'd tended, in the telescope pointed at the stars. I found more journals there, decades of her thoughts and observations. She'd never married, had instead built a life of intention and independence. She'd invested wisely, traveled extensively, supported causes she believed in, and watched her family from a distance with bemused affection and occasional frustration. One entry, written 5 years before her death, stood out. I wonder sometimes if I should have tried harder to maintain family connections, but then I remember why I left in the first place. They wanted to make me small to fit me into their idea of what a woman should be. I chose myself instead. It was lonely sometimes, but it was free. I hope Alina finds that freedom too. Sitting on the deck overlooking the Atlantic, I realized Marguerite had given me more than money. She'd given me permission to be myself, to want more, to refuse to shrink. The inheritance wasn't a rescue, it was recognition. She'd seen in me what I hadn't yet seen in myself, the capacity to survive, to transform, to build something meaningful from rubble. David stopped calling after that gala. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he and Simone had broken up, that his business was struggling with some bad investments, that he'd had to downsize. I felt no satisfaction in his troubles, but I also felt no sympathy. He was still making the same choices, still measuring his worth by external markers, still unable to see that the richest things in life had nothing. I didn't gloat, I didn't need to. Revenge, I'd learned, wasn't about making someone else suffer. It was about refusing to let their judgment define you. It was about building a life so full and meaningful that their absence became irrelevant. On the 1-year anniversary of receiving that certified letter, I stood in Morrison's during a packed reading event featuring a debut author we'd championed. The room buzzed with conversation, with genuine enthusiasm for literature and community. Patricia caught my eye from across the room and raised her coffee cup in a subtle toast. I thought about the woman who'd slept in her car a year ago, who'd believed she had nothing left to offer the world. I thought about Marguerite, watching from whatever comes after, hopefully proud of what I'd built. I thought about all the women the foundation had helped, each one discovering that their lowest moment wasn't their definition. My phone buzzed with a text from my therapist. "Don't forget our session tomorrow. Excited to hear about your progress on the memoir." The memoir. I'd started writing it 3 months ago, encouraged by the response to my essays. It was hard, excavating those dark months, but also necessary. Other women needed to know they weren't alone, that sleeping in your car didn't mean you'd failed, that sometimes you had to lose everything to discover what you were actually made of. I excused myself from the reading to step outside, needing a moment of quiet. The evening air was warm, the street busy with people heading to dinner or events. A young woman stood near the bookstore entrance, looking uncertain. She was thin, her clothes slightly rumpled, her eyes holding that particular exhaustion I recognized immediately. "Can I help you?" I asked gently. She hesitated. "I saw your sign about the literacy program. Is it really free?" "Completely free. We also have a community resource board inside with information about housing assistance, legal aid, that kind of thing, if you need anything." Her eyes filled with tears. "My husband and I just separated. I'm staying with a friend, but I need to find work, and I don't have much experience. I thought maybe if I could improve my reading skills." I put my hand on her arm. "Come inside. Let's get you signed up for the program, and I'll introduce you to someone from our foundation. We help women in transition. You're not alone in this." "Thank you," she whispered. "I feel so lost." "I know," I said. "I've been there. But you're going to be okay. I promise you're going to be okay." As I guided her inside, introducing her to Patricia and pulling out foundation materials, I felt Marguerite's presence as clearly as if she were standing beside me. This was what the money was for. Not luxury or status or proving anything to anyone. It was for this, for being the person I'd needed when I had nothing, for transforming my pain into purpose. Later that night, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and continued working on the memoir. The chapter I was writing covered those 3 weeks in the car, the absolute bottom. It was painful to revisit, to remember the cold and the fear and the shame, but it was also necessary, because that woman in the car had been strong in ways she didn't recognize. She'd gotten up every morning. She'd gone to work. She'd maintained her dignity even when everything around her said she had none. She'd survived. And in surviving, she'd earned the right to thrive. The story would end with hope, I decided. Not false hope or easy answers, but the genuine truth that sometimes life had to strip everything away before you could see what you were actually made of. That the lowest moment could become the foundation for something extraordinary. That inheritance, whether it came as money or wisdom or simply the knowledge that someone had believed in you, was only valuable if you used it to become more yourself, not less. I wrote until midnight, then closed the laptop and walked to my window. Charlotte glowed below, thousands of lives intersecting and diverging, each person carrying their own struggles and triumphs. Somewhere out there, other women were sleeping in cars, feeling invisible, wondering if they'd ever matter again. They did matter. They would survive. And maybe, if I told my story honestly enough, they'd know they weren't alone. Marguerite had given me $6.2 million, but the real inheritance was much simpler. The knowledge that I was enough, exactly as I was. That my worth wasn't determined by who loved me or left me, by what I owned or lost, by society's metrics of success or failure. I'd slept in my car and inherited millions, but the transformation wasn't about the money. It was about the woman I'd become in between, the one who'd refused to break, who'd maintained kindness in the face of cruelty, who discovered that strength looked a lot like simply continuing to exist even when everything suggested you shouldn't. That woman, I realized, had been there all along. She just needed permission to stand up and be seen. "Thank you, Marguerite," I thought, looking at the stars above the city. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for believing I could handle this. And I could. I was handling it. Not perfectly, but authentically. Not with revenge, but with purpose. Not by becoming who others wanted me to be, but by discovering who I'd always been underneath the years of making myself small. The inheritance had changed my circumstances, but I'd changed myself. And that, I was learning, made all the difference.